Welcome back to PROtalks. My name is Nate Halubka and I work within the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office. In this particular PROtalk, we're going to be talking about the eligible uses for local fiscal recovery funds. Before we go into these major categories, there's two bits of update that we want to give you. First, we've received everything that we need from the U.S. Treasury, so those grant agreements will start to flow out this week. Second, and this is a little bit of a change, we've received a good bit of information from municipalities across the state. There's some concern about receiving some of the funds or receiving your funds before the end of the fiscal year, especially right towards the end of that fiscal year. So in response to this, the Pandemic Recovery Office is going to start to release funds to those that have completed their grant agreements on or after July 1st. Now, with that, we're still following a first in, first out approach. As we receive those grant agreements in, those that submit theirs first will be those that receive their funds first, and we'll go on through that as everybody works through the process. Now, on to the eligible use areas. Now, another area that we're hearing across the state is that these funds can just be used for anything, and that's not correct. So the U.S. Treasury has put out the interim final rule, which outlines the allowable uses of these funds. And we've broken it down into these major categories, which we're going to go over today. And keep in mind that these are just the major areas, and we'll have subsequent videos that go through and talk about these in more depth. So the first major category is the COVID response and adaptation. Now, if you're familiar with the Corona Relief Funds, that's similar to what these funds are going to be used for, in that these funds are meant to really mitigate and minimize the amount of COVID in your communities. Things like, putting up barriers, buying masks, and addressing the workplaces of people that are having to work in those COVID-based scenarios. Now, the U.S. Treasury is also wanting to make sure that you understand that these funds can also be used to help the disproportionately impacted populations within your community. So as you're looking at those COVID response and adaptation, make sure that you're looking at those populations within your communities that may have been impacted more than others, and making sure that the environments that they're engaging with are safe and secure and are mitigating COVID. On to the second category, premium pay. So there are some provisions that essential workers during the COVID-19 pandemic can be provided premium pay. Now, we're going to go into this in depth in a later video. Now, there is one thing that we want to draw to your attention before we go into this in greater depth, in that just because you've worked with COVID does not mean that you're going to be eligible for premium pay. Specifically, the Treasury calls out those that are working in the COVID or working to help mitigate COVID, but maybe you're doing it teleworking and are not really frontline staff, which is who these funds are looking towards, in engaging with people that have COVID. So just because you've been working with COVID doesn't mean that you're eligible for these premium pay. We'll go through that in more depth to kind of outline who is and who likely is not eligible for this premium pay. The next area is revenue loss. And this is the one key area that we're probably getting the most amount of questions about. Now, just to let you know, there is some backward-looking allowability for this revenue loss, as well as forward-looking availability. And we'll go through that and those timelines in future videos. The area that we're also getting the most amount of questions about is how do you calculate this? And while NC Pro is not going to endorse any particular tool to help you understand this, we will look at a number of these tools and say that, of these 3, 4, 5, 10 different tools that can help you calculate your revenue loss, these might be good ones for you to look at. Just be waiting and looking as NC Pro starts to review these and see which ones are accurate and really tied to what the Treasury is intending for revenue loss calculation. The final and fourth category is infrastructure investments. Now, this is really specifically drawn out within the U.S. Treasury to talk about investments for water, sewer, and broadband, updating, improving, and forward-looking at these three categories. Now, the one important thing that we want to talk about, and we're going to go into this in more depth in the future, is to make sure that you understand that infrastructure investment doesn't mean that you can do everything in the world. It is specifically tied to water, sewer, and broadband. So as we produce more information and we go into greater detail, we'll provide that. So thank you for joining us. And like I said, we'll be giving you more in-depth information about these allowable uses. So this is just to help you start to formulate your plan, and other stakeholders can also help you understand this. We thank you, and we'll see you soon. And thank you for joining us with PROtalks. Goodbye.